In Tennessee, a white teacher gets fired for teaching students about white privilege. Parents weren't too happy when Matthew Hawn's lessons centered on different perspectives on subjects involving race, class, and sexuality using essays and videos from Black leaders. Sullivan Central High School is 95% white, with less than 1% of Black students. The 16-year veteran teacher is appealing the decision. Oh my goodness. So here we go, Xavier. It looks like this is another one of those clutch my pearls, is this critical race theory movement, moment in which, in essence, people are using this sort of big, broad rubric of critical race theory, which has nothing to do with us actually taught in schools, as an excuse to keep teachers away from essentially telling the truth. What are your thoughts?
Race is taught to children and they're taught to teens. I think it's one of the most important things when we try to push back against the concept of critical race theory, and it's not being taught on the elementary level, on the high school level, and it's taught on the collegiate law school level. I've taught critical race theory in law school. One of the most important things to note is that doesn't mean that racism and the history of racism shouldn't be taught at all. And I think that's the important part. There is a backlash of people who, I've called it white vapidity, is people live in a white bubble of complete innocence of wanting to look at themselves as good. And any reminder of how the condition of the country tells them that they are, quote unquote, not good. And it makes them have to do something about the conditions that benefit them. And they don't want to do that. They love the way it is. This is great for them. Don't change a thing. But I think that where racism is penetrated the most is when you have what's known as a race trader who is of a white background, or you said 95% are in these predominantly white background and challenge the structure that exists. Now, one of the bigger issues that is faced by this gentleman is that he kept saying, I'm going to stop doing this. This really hurts him and harms him because the pressure that was faced upon him, he basically fell into it over and over and over and over again. And it became a provocateur. And so that may harm his chance as some sort of appeal. But I think that he should have stood up right in the first sense and said, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to proceed. But that's him on the appeal process. But he did the right thing in terms of presenting what he presented, but how he did it along the way may harm his chances of actually getting an appeal. But this is the okie doke. We already know.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the head on the nail when you said that really what we're seeing here is this concerted effort to, in essence, whitewash white people, right? It's this idea that, we should not speak to reality in terms of history and in terms of contemporary reality as it relates to white privilege and its impact on people who are not white. And quite frankly, its impact on white people. It's as if not only do we not want to talk about just how things happen in the reality around race in this nation, it's that we want to operate under this illusion that every advantage that white people receive writ large is deserved, right? That there's some level, it sort of plays into this white superiority mythology. When you pull back the covers and you show the reality that there are built-in advantages in the system that help you get what you want, right? That's what they don't want to talk about. Is that really what's happening here in a case like this, Mustafa?
I think a large percentage of it is. I mean, it's almost like when people talk about the history of Europe and they only want to talk about, kings and queens and all this other kind of stuff and not the reality of, the disparate sort of living situations that the majority of folks were going through. In our country, we never want to tell the truth. We have this mythology that exists about our country, and it actually weakens us because it doesn't show, how we've fallen down, where we've made mistakes, and how we're supposedly moving forward in a better direction. Here's the way I break it down for folks when we talk about these issues. It's almost like in families when there's child abuse or where there's sexual abuse, and everybody wants to be quiet and pretend that it didn't happen and that it'll just go away. And that's how folks also deal with race in this country. They don't want to talk about everything that they did with the genocide around indigenous brothers and sisters. They don't want to talk about enslaving of African people and getting free labor and making trillions of dollars off of that. which is really the bedrock that our country was built on. We just need to tell the truth. Tell the truth, and then do the steps that are necessary to heal our country, and to also make sure that there are reparations or other sorts of actions that address the people who this country has built on top of.
Well, I think,
Mustafa, I do believe, though, that the truth is actually being told. We just had the Mayor-elect Dickens on the show talking about Buckhead. They're openly saying we want to leave Atlanta because there's a black man that's mayor. And the politics that he represents doesn't represent who we are. And that is in the open. There is no hiding that. There is no trying to keep that under wraps. It's just how it's framed to the public in terms of who perceives that to be right and who perceives that to be wrong. It's just that simple as that.
Absolutely. But when we talk about the classroom, I think what's happening here is we don't want to talk about the truth about history. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, number one, when you are truthful about what really happened in this nation's history, then any person of any moral conscience would feel a need to take some corrective action, which is what they are trying to avoid. You just mentioned, for example, reparations. Lord God forbid. You want to see some clutching pearls? You're going to see it then, okay, when you open up that conversation. And then the next part of this coin is, honestly, I have to go back to this issue of there is this desire to avoid the fact of the built-in advantages. Yes, there are wealth disparities that tremendously, advantage the white community, why there's so much wealth as compared, for example, to black wealth. But then again, you don't want to talk about how you got all that wealth. You don't want to talk about the centuries of free labor that allow for that to accumulate. You don't want to talk about all of the sort of discriminatory policies that were put in place that built the suburbs, that allowed your parents to be able to buy homes for little or nothing, that appreciated in value. Those were unfair advantages. I could go on and give a boatload of unfair advantages. And what's really interesting is those unfair advantages, that predisposition for wanting to tilt the system continues to this day. That's exactly what's happening with these voting rights laws that are happening all over the country. They want to build in unfair advantages that will lead to, in essence, an apartheid state that gives white people more voting power than everyone else in this country. Isn't it that white people are just addicted to not playing fair and they don't want that truth to be told in schools?
Well, when you go to the club, everybody want to be a VIP. Right? And I think that if you're a VIP, you don't want to go down and dance with everybody in the middle of the floor. And I think that that's the narrative that exists in our society right now is, hey, I didn't have anything to do with me getting here, but I'm here now and I'm going to protect where I am. And until we frame this a little bit differently, and this is a national security issue. When our neighbors across the world see that America doesn't honor its citizens, then it makes us less like a nation to look up to. It makes us more vulnerable to those who want to harm us.
Yeah, but they don't care. I don't think they care as long as they get an advantage. Listen, I've seen studies that suggest that when white folk believe that written large, obviously this doesn't account for everybody, but writ large, if you look at survey data, when white people believe that people of color will be advantaged by democracy, guess what? Their support of democracy declines. This is why I'm not shocked when we're looking at what's happened in terms of the very sort of calculated tilt toward autocracy that's happening in this nation. It doesn't surprise me because they know that their numeric advantage is disappearing, and therefore they want to tilt the system to give undeserved power to their cohort so they can continue to be in charge with voting rights, with stacking the courts, with everything that's going to allow a white minority to have oversized power and no longer a democratic system. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Mustafa?
Well, you already shared with folks. It is about the apartheid-esque system that folks are trying to put in place. This is about power and privilege. And this is about trying to get their arms around as much of it as possible as the browning of America happens. Mm-hmm. That's why we see all of these actions that are going on in the state level, of trying to limit people's ability to be able to vote, of the redistricting that's going on, all these different dynamics, because all of it is tied into power and resources and thinking critically about not what's happening in this moment or next year. This is about 5, 10, 15, 20 years of making sure that you are putting in place structures so that your voices are the most dominant and have the most influence. So for me, I'm very clear. It's about power and privilege.
Boom. I completely agree.
All right, folks, back to our Roll Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Once upon a time, there lived a princess with really long hair who was waiting for a prince to come save her. But really, who has time for that?
Let's go. Feeling myself. I'm feeling
She ordered herself a ladder with Prime one-day delivery, and she was out of there.
I'm with some hood girls looking back at it, and a good girl in my tax bracket.
Now, her hairdressing empire is killing it. And the prince? Well, who cares? Prime changes everything.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?